Hi and welcome back to the Pulsjet powered TameCat build video. Unfortunately I didn't get it finished in time for the weekend. Too many other calls on my time and teaching other people to fly and things like that sort of soaked up the hours I'd set aside to get this thing in the air. But we've got a major jet meet coming up here in a few days time and I'm going to have it going for them. So what I'm going to show you, I've done a bit of work since the last video. What I've done is basically I've bolted on the main undercarriage. Now that's just four little nylon straps that screw into the bottom. That's all in place, quite solid, and the nose leg is now in place. I'm going to show you now a close-up of what I did with the nose leg inside here. Now as you can see, I put a big piece of plywood in here, 2 bits of plywood actually, to basically transfer some of the stress from this frame, this former, back to this one where the nose leg was originally mounted. That means this is going to be really, really tough, so I'm happy with that. I've also put in some balsa here to act as servo mounts for the servo I'm going to use on the nose leg, which is over here. So here's the servo. That servo is actually going to slot in there, and there'll be a very short arm from there to the steering arm, which, as you can see, turns the front wheel. This also means that my steering servo is right up the front here, and that's good because it means the center of gravity is going to be kept forward as much as I can get it. The other thing I've done, as you can see on this former in here, is I've marked a line around there because I'm going to have to cut that out to put the fuel tank in. There's a lot of space. Here's the fuel tank. It's a big 20-ounce fuel tank I'm going to use initially. Obviously, to get that in there, it's not going to fit without making a modification to that former. Now, unfortunately, the former is going to fall right in the middle of the fuel tank. So I'm going to cut a hole so I can slide the fuel tank through that former, and that'll then enable me to mount that in. The other thing that's going to have to go is this little bomb release thing, this little, I don't know, thing here, which is absolutely ridiculous because you can't even hook a servo up to it. So that's coming out, but unfortunately it's one of the few things that's really, really glued in well, so I'm going to have to sort of cut around and hack it out so that I can get the fuel tank flush on the bottom of the fuselage floor. So next thing I'm going to do also is I'm going to put the elevator servo in. And I thought long and hard about where to put the elevator servo. I could mount it further forward, which would help with the CG, but that would leave me with a very long pushrod which could buckle and bow and cause flutter on those great big elevators at the back. So what I've decided to do is leave the elevator servo where it is with a nice short pushrod, and basically that will, might have to put some weight in the front to counteract the effect of that. Now one other aspect of the build is the nose area. What I've got here is the cowl that goes on the front of the model, like this. What I've done is, because it comes with a spinner which fits nicely into the lines of the cowl, I've just basically bolted the spinner through the hole in the front of the cowl. Okay, it's got some holes which will look a bit silly because the propeller's supposed to go there, but for the first flights anyway, I'm simply bolting the spinner to the front of the cowl, and then the cowling will go on the front of the plane, give us a nice aerodynamic lines. If it flies, I may make a new nose out of polystyrene and fiberglass it up, but at this stage we just get the damn thing in the air as quickly as we can. So to give you another look at that cowling from a distance, here's my cowl with my spinner bolted on the front. That will go onto there, and it'll give us a more streamlined nose than would otherwise be the case if we didn't put anything on there. Okay, so now I've cut this big hole out here for the tank in that former, and I'm using a 20-ounce Dubro tank. Now, it's not the ideal tank, but it's what I had laying around. That tank will now fit nicely in there. I'm not going to put it in yet because it's actually just a tight squeeze still. And what I'm going to do is put the hoses in, put the bung in, and pressure test it to make sure it doesn't leak. Because once it's in there, it'll be a pain in the backside to get it out again to fix any leaks that may occur. Now, while I'm on the subject of fuel tanks, as I mentioned, I'm using a 20-ounce Dubro tank. It's quite big. It's at 600 millilitres in the new measure. And this is the fuel bung. Now, when you buy these, they come with a black rubber fuel bung, which is for glow fuel, nitro fuel. You can't use that with the petrol that I use in a Pulsejet, so you have to get the gas bung, which is a brown one. The other thing is, you can't use silicone tubing. You've got to use kind of plastic. You can use Tygon, you can use neoprene, and there's probably some others, but you've got to use a different kind of fuel tubing. So you've also got to keep an eye on the line for the clunk, because I've had this one here. I'll just zoom in a bit. I've had this fuel clunk here in a fuel tank for, oh, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 months, and already it's gone quite stiff. This is neoprene, this is good quality neoprene, and it still goes stiff. So you've got to keep an eye on the clunk line, and I may actually try using some of this red plastic that I got from China. Yes, it was cheap as, and it seems to be every bit as good as Tygon, which costs like a king's ransom for a tiny little length. Right, now I've got the noseleg steering servo screwed in place. I've also screwed in place the elevator servo here, and I'm ready to put in the, also put the horn on for the elevator. There's a little horn on there. So I'm ready to hook up the elevator linkage. But one thing I've noticed is they give you these push rods, if I can find the right one. Here's the push rod. When you operate the servos to give you up elevator, it's going to be pushing on the horn because the elevator horn is on the bottom, right? So it's going to push. So if you want a lot of elevator and you're going very fast, there'll be a lot of pressure on this push rod. Now, I'll show you what happens with these tiny little 1.5mm or 2mm push rods when you put pressure on them. They bend. Look at that, it's bent. That's not what we want in a model which may be grossly overpowered. So, what I intend to do is to strengthen that push rod, but how do we strengthen it? Well, one of the good things we can use for that is carbon fibre tubing. Yep, this stuff's quite often used in your foamies and things to strengthen up the wings, but you can also slide it over a push rod, a metal push rod. I'll take this one off with all its accoutrements. Slide it over a push rod and it makes it very, very stiff. So I'm going to do that, cut it to length, slide over the push rod for the elevator so that we don't have any bowing when we get the back pressure from the aircraft moving through the air. Okay, so now I've finished the little push rod. As you can see, it's got the carbon. I used a little bit of heat shrink at each end there just to make it look nice and neat. But now this is very, very stiff. I cannot bend it, and it's no heavier than it was before. Well, very little heavier anyway. So here you can see the way I've set this up. I've got the servo, I put a 90-degree bend in the end of the wire, and I've used one of those little capture things, those little catches there to secure it against the servo arm. I'm not a great fan of using the little posts, and I couldn't work out from the instructions and the parts supplied how we're going to do this, because according to the instructions you have a clevis on each end of that push rod, but only one end was threaded, so that makes it a bit more difficult. Anyway, had a few of these little white clips around, so I used those, bent that through 90 degrees. That's now a very good, a very firm elevator. It's not going to flutter too much, I hope. If it does flutter, then basically it's just because the wood is flexible, and there is a bit of flex in that wood. Okay, so our tank bay has been prepared. Notice I've laid in some of this very, very fashionable pink closed cell foam. Pink is the rage, apparently. That's just to give the tank a little bit of cushioning on the bottom there, stop it, because also we've still got a little bit of a height in this former to maintain some strength, so it just stops it from being pivoting on that particular former there. As I say, just give you a close-up of the servo at the front for the steering, which will hook through, the servo arm will come out here, a little wire rod through there, very short, very good. The receiver, and I'm going to be using a FreeSky in this because I've had good luck with the FreeSky stuff. I've actually gone out and bought some. I'm going to be using a FreeSky receiver. It'll probably sit in here somewhere, 2 aerials, 2.4 gigs. But quite a challenge for a 2.4 gigs this plane, because we're going to have a whole lot of metal on it. There's going to be a big aluminium sheet running down there to protect the airframe from heat, and we've got the big pulsejet as well. So we'll check out and see how well the diversity works on these receivers, because unlike some other receivers that look like this, these actually do have receiver antenna diversity. They switch between the two antennas. Not all the 2.4 systems I tested with 2 aerials actually did that. More on that on my review on rcmodelreviews.com. Okay, no, don't worry, I haven't finished it. I didn't miss bits out. It's just put together temporarily so you can see what it's going to look like when it's finished. And it's going to be pretty good. It's not actually that heavy either. Look at it, it's quite light really. This is the way the engine's going to go on the top of it. But we've still got some work to do before we set this little baby on fire. Obviously we've got to mount this pulsejet, and that's why I didn't put the wing together until quite late on. I'll just take this off. We've also got to screw on the nose cone and spinner, which are just sitting there for that. This is an easy job to put on. I've got to basically mount the radio gear, the receiver and the battery, run a bit of wiring and an off-on switch. Got to glue this wing together. Haven't done the wing yet because it's going to have an engine mount right smack in the middle of it to hold the front of the pulsejet, and I'm going to have to put some holes in here so that we can get the pressure line down and the fuel line up from our fuel tank, which coincidentally is all ready to be stuffed into the inside with the lovely pansy looking pink foam. The fins also, I haven't put those on yet, but that's a quick 5-minute job. The hatch cover, that hasn't gone on, but I've got a piece of aluminium to go across here to protect the back of the aircraft from bursting into flames when we fire up the pulsejet. So as you can see, not a lot to do. I'm reckoning 2-3 hours maybe at the maximum to finish this build. Then we go flying. So, if you're not already a subscriber to this wonderful channel, please subscribe now, and that way you won't miss out the next build video, which will be the final build video, and more importantly, you won't miss out on the flight video, which is going to be something to see, I can tell you. Right, I better carry on, see what I can get done before the sunlight disappears, and I thank you for watching. Tune in real soon, a day or two, for the next in the build series, and then the flight test.